There's Patrick.
All right, good evening, everyone. 6:01, call the meeting to order. Nancy, you have attendance?
I do.
All right, thank you. We have minutes from March 22nd for approval. Any
So moved.
comments? All right, we have a motion to approve from Mr. I,
Second.
second from Lois. Anybody have any comments, corrections? Patrick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just noticed an email, Nancy, you sent a revision to the minutes, but I already read the prior. Can you just tell us what the revision is?
Yes, I consolidated some of the comments under new business and made some grammatical corrections.
Okay,
They were all
so-
minor in nature.
Okay, thank you. So the motion would be to accept the revised minutes as submitted.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other hands? If not, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. Let's go to, all right, we got a lot of project updates. Let's start with Deanna, TSKP.
Yes, hello, everybody. Let me, something's wrong with my screen, I apologize, but so the updates that we have is regarding the swing space. We had a meeting with Dwight Carlson on April 3rd. There were some comments. We make some revisions on the plan to reflect his request. I think, Mark, I'm not remember you were in the meeting, but Chip was part of the meeting. His main concern is exit signs, emergency lighting for the temporary space. We discussed also his request of a statement of professional opinion regarding the loading of the space. I can share with you the updated plan if you want. There's some minor revisions where we reflected, let's see if I can get it. We reflected his comments. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Now,
Here we go.
Okay. So just wanted to share with you, this is the same plan that I presented, I think, last time with a few updates. Let me go to the bottom of the page. The layout is the same that we discussed earlier. On the bottom of the page, we added a few notes. Dwight Carlson mentioned the concerns about the stability of the book stacks. He mentioned maybe a cross bracing will be required in the tallest book stacks. So whether the note here is necessary. Also, the comment from our engineer about that the maximum allowable load is 65 pounds per square feet. And also we added here the statement from our engineer about to keep no more than 3 shelves filled with books due to the loads for the space for a business use. Other than that, I believe the plan is the same. We also agreed to, he wanted to see a ceiling plan. I think Chip was looking for, to see if he could find some drawings from this building for the ceiling plan so we can show a lighting plan for this space.
Yeah, I don't have that yet.
Yeah, that's what
I'm hesitant to request too much until we finalize the move-in day and get all the least finalized, so.
Okay. Also, the building inspector mentioned that the permit will be required. And I think one of the questions we have is who is gonna be the applicant, which I believe is gonna be the town of Bloomfield. So
That's
from,
correct.
also from our part, we have this plan ready. I talked today with Michael Horton. They will send me the statement of professional opinion to be part of this permit, and I will send, I guess, the documents to Chip and to you, Mark. Those are the updates regarding the swing space. The other update is regarding the MDC encroachment permit. We heard from SLR that the permit is, or the encroachment permit is likely to be approved. There is a draft that we saw last week, and we heard that the formal approval will be coming this week. The date has not been determined, but we will hear something probably soon. That's all I have regarding updates. Oh, the other update is that TSKP and the consultant, we sent documents for addendum 1 for the projects. Those were sent also the week of April 4th, I believe. Those are my updates for the project.
Okay, questions for Deanna? Patrick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deanna, just one question. Wasn't there some concern raised about the exit signs? Did we resolve the exits?
No, because we do not have the lighting plans available. So I know the building inspector has some concerns about the book stacks blocking the exit signs. So we discussed maybe doing he could do visual inspection in the field when he sees maybe marking up the location of the book stacks on the floor so he can see if there are any obstructions. But we do not have any plans to show him the location of the lighting or the exit signs.
Okay, because I thought we did hear that the shelves can't be lowered. I mean, they're higher than 3 shelves, but we can't change the height of them.
Yes, we cannot. So that was the kind of agreement that he was going to do like a visual inspection at some point to see if there were any obstructions. And he mentioned he may be getting an electrician on board to do any revisions if we need to add more exit signs or something for the space.
Okay.
So Deanna, the building official wanted to see the ceiling plan to see where the exit lights are.
He wanted to see, let me go to my notes. He wanted to see, yes, he wanted to see a ceiling plan. He was concerned about the exit signs and about the lighting, emergency lighting too.
Oh, emergency lighting as well.
Right.
Yes.
Because the stacks could be blocking and creating shadows in some of the areas from the emergency lights, so that they wouldn't get the appropriate light levels.
All right, so we may have to add some battery operated devices here.
Right.
We might, but I mean, these situations happen usually when we have this type of projects, and if the building official is okay to that to be on site and review the location, and if we need to add more signs, he will or temporary emergency lighting. I'm sorry, we can do that. It's just a temporary space.
So it sounds like we need to make sure we have enough time between the time the stacks actually are moved in and we occupy the space between those 2 points to add those things, correct?
Right.
Yes.
I would think we'd have enough time to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should we add a footnote like you showed, Deanna, at the bottom about, exits will be displayed by, something or other? Should there be something down there on the bottom?
We could add a note about the exit signs will be added as required or something like that. He wanted this note so he has something on record.
Yeah. Okay, whatever
I
you
could,
think is best.
yeah, I could do that. Let me talk to Richard too. Maybe we can do that because I sent these plans, I believe, to Chip and to our engineer, but I'll bundle it together with a letter. So you.
Okay, yeah, I would
Yeah,
just.
I don't know that a note is gonna be necessary because, he's going to be checking that in the field at the, at the time anyway, either way.
Okay.
So, we'll be prepared to add as necessary.
Okay, I just
Okay.
didn't want us to get stuck, that would be something to hold us up.
No, that note wouldn't, whether there's a
gonna
note
see
there
it.
or not, he's not gonna, if he doesn't feel that the light levels or exit sign visibility is appropriate, we're gonna have to make that adjustment
Make
right
it
then and
change.
there.
Okay,
Mhm.
thanks, Chip.
Yep.
Thanks, Deanna.
Any other questions for Deanna? All right, thanks, Deanna. Let's move on to Downs. We've got Anthony and Scott.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? It's good to see everybody. All right, can you see my screen, Mark?
We're good.
Okay. Just so update on the project schedule, as everyone's been witnessing, the schedule's been sliding as we're waiting on these grant approvals. And it's been a direct effect of the grant approvals of our bid documents. When I say grant from DECD and the state library, I was able to finally get through to the DCD yesterday, and I talked to, I believe her name's Melinda, and she is reviewing it today, actually. So I haven't gotten a response yet, but she's promising by the end of this week, we're gonna have something as a response to if we need to add anything to our documents or whatever we need to be able to move forward, which is promising. With that stated, I'm going to show you a bar chart schedule, but right now I'm just going to go through some of the high points of it that we've updated thus far for pre-construction and a start date for construction and how this affects the owner's move-in, the library's move-in date as well. So originally we had a mid-April, which we're in mid-April right now, a little past, for a move-out date for library, and that hasn't been able to be realized because we never had a chance to go out to bid in March, unfortunately, due to the review processes from the grant. So at this point, we're figuring about mid-June, if we can get some direction from the grant this week, and potentially put out advertisements next week to go out to bid and get documents going out to subcontractors on the street to be able to bid the project. The period for bidding is about a month, and then scope reviews and putting together GMPs about another month. So we're figuring about 8 weeks of time. And that leads to a construction start date for both projects for mid-July, with McMahon going to May of 2024 and Prosser going to mid-November of 2024. And when I bring up the bar chart, you can see that these items in red are pretty critical, being the grant review from DECD and State Library. And that's what's pushing all these bars out, which is ultimately pushing out the start date of the project. This one is McMahon to July 13th. Okay. By gaining access at this point, I've tentatively given them an approval date of next Monday. So if we get something this week, that's helpful. And that allows us to get advertisements out and start this bid period with the addendum for essentially the month of May. And upon completing the bid period, we're going to go right into our scope reviews and our GMP development, okay, which is the end of May going into June. And, just towards the end of our scope reviews and as we're putting our GMP together, we're going to have a really good idea of where the budget stands. And don't get me wrong, the bid day, when we get all the bids in, we're going to see what the budget is. But we're going to have to ferret that out and make sure that all those numbers that we got from the lowest responsible bidder are indeed responsible bidders, and that we have a budget that, makes sense based on our scope reviews and ensuring that every trade has did what they were supposed to, okay? But that leads where you're safe to say, okay, the budget looks pretty good. We've done a lot of scope reviews and, it's time to start looking to move out of the library in mid-June. As long as lease agreements are good and obviously, what has to be done with the building department, as Deanna had mentioned, with some of their reviews with the emergency lighting. But, based on where the schedule is now, there appears to be time to get through that. And then, ultimately leading after GMP to a town approval and our notice to proceed for the beginning of July, all the trades. Okay. So at this point in time, it's a snapshot in time. This is where we stand with the schedule. And, it was a good sign that we were able to talk to the DECD yesterday. And yes, they're very backed up and they have limited staff, but I guess they're getting more staff, so that's good for future projects. But we need it now, obviously. And hopefully she's able to get that review to us between tomorrow and Friday. Is there any questions based on where we are now?
Questions for Scott? Lois?
Yeah, I need to understand the sequence better.
Sure.
At what point can we move the library with the understanding that we are going ahead and we have a plan that we're going to do? Do you have to have chosen all of the responses, or can you get the responses back and be choosing among them and still have the library moving?
When you say responses, do you mean the bids?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so Lois, let me take that if you will, or Scott, let me take that. The
Sure.
issue is that we have a 14-month lease. And we don't want to add time on the end of that because we'll be paying monthly beyond that. So we don't want to move until Downs is ready to start construction. Right. So yeah, we could move today, but all that would mean is that we would run out of time on our 14-month lease and would be paying a lot more at the end. So we want to delay the move as long as we can so that when we're done moving, construction can start right away.
So that will not happen until after we have chosen the bidders with whom we want to work.
Correct, because they won't be starting construction until they're chosen.
Right.
Okay, and how does that fit in with the state grant? You've talked about the DECD grant.
You mean as far as, well, the grants that you've received, they have in their guidelines a review process of our bid documents and our advertisement to bid. And they've had them now for maybe approximately 3 weeks, maybe a little over. And we've been waiting for feedback on that because we essentially, per their guidelines, can't put the advertisement out or our bid documents out without their review and their comments. So that's what we've been waiting on all this time as we've gone through these meetings and at the building committee meetings as we've talked about. Or else we would be out to bid.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Patrick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Scott, thank you for all this info. I just have two quick things. So based, where we are in the current environment, I mean, could you just give us like your impression of, what you think the bids are going to come in? I mean, are we in a better place for, pricing, or are we still kind of dealing with, the whole pandemic era stuff that was causing everything to be crazy?
Yeah, I mean, we're not quite out of the pandemic era stuff.
Mhm.
We do have better lead times with some things. Like, for instance, we can now get roof materials where we couldn't before. Those are back to normal, but they cost,
Okay.
and everybody's feeling that. Not just
Yeah.
Bloomfield is going to feel that. Glass is very expensive, and it's gotten expensive since the new year, even more so. Even last year it was, but it seems to have climbed up a bit more. So those are just some of the feelers that I have out there based on, some projects that we've had out to bid in the past month and a half.
Does this help us with that whole issue about the board that we needed for the crosser? Does this delay help that situation?
The board?
Yeah.
Switch gear. I think
The
we
switch
should
gear,
switch
thanks,
gear.
Nancy. Yeah, that switch gear. Does
The
this?
switch gear, yeah, well. No, because it's,
Hmm,
all we're doing is shifting, you know?
Yeah,
What helped is, man, if we could have bought it, that would have helped tremendously. And unfortunately, we can't. The switchgear has not gotten any better. It's still the same. Maybe even a little worse, but it depends who you talk to and it depends who you buy from.
hmm,
Okay. So I mean, we're still holding 75 weeks, which, you know, is it doable in Prosser? Yes, you're just receiving it at the end of the project. And actually, I have to, I actually have the McMahon schedule up right now. The Prosser is transferred over, updated, but I actually have to work it backwards in order to make it work properly. So it doesn't throw the whole schedule off because it comes so late in the game. And
Okay.
McMahon, if we weren't going to that even with changing the switchgear at McMahon to a panelized system, you know, which is 35 weeks versus 75, it's still coming towards the end of the project, which, you know, it presents some issues with getting equipment started. And, you know, it pushes things out a little bit, but it's, you know, we can manage it and figure it out. But no, the switchgear issue just does not seem to be going away.
okay. So it's more of a watch, gonna be a watch item for us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Okay, so last thing is, was there anything scheduled to happen, you know, like in this period of sort of waiting that we need to be concerned about, or was scheduled and has to be rescheduled? And we, you know, are there any problems that we're expecting in this sort of gap period here? That we're,
We've got some activities kind of dipping in winter conditions that may not have been in winter conditions, but then some activities improved being in better weather. For instance, with Prosser, I think we're heading more into the winter with masonry than we were before.
Mhm.
So yeah, we are dealing with a few repercussions there. And then, you know, maybe we're putting a roof on more in the springtime, which is good. So,
yeah.
you know, but it's more expensive to have masonry in the winter than, you know, working a roof in the winter. So yeah, there has been a few negative effects. There's a shift, you know, we keep shifting. And in order to stop the shift, we got to get to bid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate
you're
it.
welcome.
Lois?
I'm concerned about the bids coming in and coming in higher than we can manage. Is your sense that the add alternate list is sufficient? Have we built enough of that in so that we're not going to have to give up more than we had thought about initially? In terms of changing design or things in that we planned for the library?
Well,
Am I making myself clear?
you are, but you know, what it comes down to, Lois, is you've got an alternate list based on what the town wants, right?
Right.
So could that be affected? Yeah, it could be, sure. But we don't know. And if it is affected and the budgets are high, or the bids are high based on our budgets, you know, what I can say is that we know what our value management list items are from the past. And, you know, do we all want to have to revisit that? Of course not. But do we have avenues to be able to look at that and make good decisions as a whole team? I think so, in order to get the job going.
And does it take a long time? Is that piece of it? If you have to make these decisions, does it take a long
I'm
time?
not gonna say it takes a long time because a lot of the work has already been done. I think what's gonna take time is if decisions have to be made. And what does take time is you have to get updates from subcontractors. If they have to deduct anything or, you know, based on the bidders you receive. You know, you've got to go through that exercise. I know that doesn't fully answer your question, but
No,
we don't want to head in that direction, obviously, but if we have to, based on how the bids come in, we're all gonna have to get together and make some decisions. And hopefully that's not the case.
thank you.
You're welcome.
More questions for Scott?
And Lois, I think based on the way we want to bid it, we have some advantages too, where we're trying to give we are giving options to bidders to, if you're an electrician, and you're bidding both, you want to bid both projects, you have an option to, give a discount and give one number for both jobs. So I'm hoping that will help alleviate some of those budget concerns as well. As an example.
Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.
All right, I don't see any more questions, so let's move on to Chip, your update.
Yep, my update really is just about needing to get going, we need a date so that we can finalize the lease and, keep moving with the preparation. So, I'm kind of in holding, waiting for the start of, the same approvals everybody else is.
Yeah, I know it's been frustrating waiting on the state, but it's been out of our control. I appreciate
Yep.
everybody reaching out to them. And it seems to have been helping rather than aggravating, at least with DECD. So we're still awaiting the state library on their approval as well. So that's where we stand. Questions for Chip? All right, let's go to Elizabeth. I don't know if, I think we've talked about these grants, but I don't know if you have any additional information for us at this point.
Unfortunately, no. Acting Town Manager Howe did reach back out to the state library and they said information was forthcoming, but we have yet to hear anything back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sharon, for doing that. That's a good week and a half ago that we sort of got a promise of maybe something that we might see something last week. That's what I read, but all right, so we just need to stay on these people and get us out to bid as soon as we can. All right, Elizabeth, you wanna
Wait, Lois has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lois.
Thank you. Assuming that we get the DECD approval, how long are we going to wait for the state? Are they still saying that we contracted something too early? Is that what we're waiting on, that decision? Because how long can we wait?
Well, what I have in my mind here is when we do hear from DECD, then it becomes very clear that the state library is the one and only thing holding us up. And I would be in favor of getting on them immediately, once we get the DECD approval and find out what is going on. They need to understand that they are the sole entity holding us up from, proceeding. So, I don't, my advice to everyone is to not sit back and wait for them again, once we hear from DECD, which should, according to Scott and his contact there, should be within a day or two, we hope.
And Chair, I would just like to add that we're waiting on, I think, two things from the state library. First of all, is their approval of our bid documents and our bid ad, which were sent to them at the same time they were sent to DECD. And I believe that was a month ago, actually a few days more than a month. The second thing, obviously, we're waiting for is their response to our response about their concerns about following the grant processes.
Correct.
And just so that you know, tomorrow will be 2 weeks since I sent that initial email. So I don't know what their interpretation of be in touch with you very soon is.
Okay, well, hopefully we're in a position to ask them very shortly. Anything else on the grants? Okay, then Elizabeth, if you would kindly move on to outreach, please.
So as everyone can guess, these changing timelines is difficult for the public to understand. That being said, we are doing our best to communicate appropriately. The town digital billboards now have information pointing the public to our website. All updated timelines will be put there immediately as known. And we, as of today, story times are officially in council chambers every Wednesday morning at 10:30. And we are closed on Tuesdays, and we are all systems a go in terms of moving forward. So we too are really hopeful that there's no more delays, as it's a difficult thing for our public to understand. We are also in connection with the messenger. They put in a little blurb essentially with some updates about what's going on. And as soon as that lease is signed, we're going to have a full page ad in the messenger advertising all of the relevant information.
Great, yeah, thank you. You know, it's difficult for all of us to understand because we've just not been able to pin down the date. You know, we're relying on other parties. And I think that's the message that has to get out there. You know, we saw this bar chart tonight from Scott, and those dates are not fixed. So I don't want to send the wrong message out to the public that, oh, now we have a date, you know, here it is on the bar chart. You know, that's contingent upon being able to go out to bid within the next couple of days. So if we can't go out to bid in the next couple of days, those dates are wrong. And that will confuse the public. So, you know, those are just sliding out of our control at the moment. So that's the message, really, you know, that we are waiting on other agencies here. But thank you for, you know, trying to make that clear to everybody. Lois?
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Nancy, I know that there are two pieces. One is the bid documents and the other is the grant from the library board. Let's assume that there is no grant. Do they still have to approve our bid documents?
Technically, I guess no.
I have a question on that too. Nancy, is it safe to assume that the DECD approval process is highly similar to what the state library board would be?
I
Or
think,
is it possible that it could be
my
separate?
understanding is the DECD one is a lot more involved than the state library. I think the state library, if I'm not mistaken, just wanted to see our ad. I don't think they really were that concerned about looking through the bid documents. And I think DECD is actually reviewing bid documents as well. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, that is right. I was getting the impression that the state library wanted to see our bid back, so I just made it all one link and made sure.
Okay.
both.
And I say that because I remember there being emails with the former person at the state library who basically said that, you know, when we were talking about the McMahon grant, she could turn it around in a day, which led me to believe they were just looking at the bid ad and not going through the level of detail that were contained in the bid documents.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's how I understand it as well.
Okay. Let's Leah, anything on technology? I think we're in pretty good shape there, right?
Yeah, we're in good shape. You know, we kind of meet as needed, but we don't have anything on the books right now, so.
Okay, let's get our bids in.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move to approval of invoices. Nancy?
The first one we have is to TSKP. It's invoice 200802-15. And it's for services at Prosser through February 28th, 2023. And it's in the amount of $55,500.
So moved.
Moved by Bob,
Seconded.
second by Liz. Thank you, Liz. Questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Motion passes. Thank you. Next.
The next one is also TSKP. These are for services at McMahon through February 28th, 2023. It's invoice number 220103-12, and it's in the amount of $18,000.
So moved.
Second.
By Bob, seconded by, that was Liz, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Questions, comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any
Aye.
nays? That's 3 and 4. Any nays? Okay, that passes. Thank you very much.
Next is also TSKP Studio. This is invoice number 200802-16. It's through Prosser Services through March 31st, 2023, and it is in the amount of, I don't know, I lost a page. I think I lost a page. I think it's $20,840. I do want to note that this contains a charge of $2,340 for additional services. These were for services related to the design of the swing space that were not covered under the basic contract.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Bob, seconded by Jesse. Thank you very much. Questions, comments? I just want to make it clear, we're really looking at 2 months worth of.
That is correct, because we
Yes,
missed a month
because
last
we
time.
missed a meeting. Yeah, okay. All right. Don't see any hands. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes. Thank you.
Next is also TSKP, invoice number 220103-13. This is for services through March of 23 as well. The total amount was $6,631.18, and it includes some reimbursable expenses.
So moved.
Second.
Bob, second by.
Second by Liz.
Thank you. And that's McMahon also. All right. Okay.
Mhm.
Questions, comments?
Chair, quick question. Nancy, some
Yes.
of these invoices had a plus 10%. What was that all about?
I believe there's a markup on things that are not part of the basic contract, which would include the reimbursables.
I
The
believe it's,
services that are not part of it. I'm sorry, I meant to say, because that is contractually, I think we agreed to 10% markup on everything but the basic services.
well, it's reimbursables.
It's the reimbursables, yes.
Okay, so you're saying that was part of our agreement?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, because I was wondering, I think almost every one of them had a plus 10%.
The only one I see there, Patrick, is the one we're talking about right now, for the reimbursable printing costs.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when I looked at them on my computer, they're different than the ones that I could see on my mobile. So I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, there were no markups on the other things we just approved. Because there were no reimbursables.
Okay.
Correct. And even for the additional services for the swing space, there was no markup on that. So the only markup that appeared was on the last invoice as it for McMahon. And they did attach their invoices to those.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Motion passes. Thank you.
Next, we have an invoice to SLR. This one, I apologize. It's been, it's outstanding since December. And this was for, traffic, design off-site, and it is for $120.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Bob, seconded by Liz. I didn't see that in the packet, Nancy. Did I miss it or?
Oh, I thought it was,
There's that Van Zelm Engineers.
Yeah, we
there
have.
was not one
Van
from SLR.
Zelm. Not that I know of.
Oops. It's
No.
old too.
Is this something you can pop on a screen?
I'm
or-
gonna look for that. Hopefully I can. It's not letting me access that file. So
Um,
I'll postpone this one until next time.
You sure? I mean,
We can table it.
okay, we have a motion to table the invoice. All in
So
fa-
moved.
that just goes without, table
Second.
goes right on it. So, all in favor of tabling, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? All right, that invoice, approval of invoice is tabled. We've got one more here, right?
And the last one is for Van Zelm. It is for invoice number 0050550 for $2,268 for commissioning services.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Bob, seconded by Liz. Questions? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Please. Thank you for that last one. Motion passes.
That's all I have.
Okay. All right, meeting dates coming up. We've got two in May, the 3rd and the 17th. Please let us know if you will be away. Can't make the meeting. I will not be at the meeting on the 17th, but I already checked in with Patrick, who will take the lead. Thank you, Patrick, for that.
You're welcome.
17th. Okay.
Mark, this is Jesse. I also won't be at the 17th. That's my wedding anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, just, you
Thank
know,
you so much.
well,
20
just bring-
years, 20 years.
Just bring your wife to the meeting, you know?
I don't know. You
Yeah.
might not want that smoke. I'm just
You
saying.
won't make the next 20
Yes.
years.
No.
All right, thanks. Okay, comments from the committee. Elizabeth.
I had two comments. I just wanted to note that the next round for the CIF grant applications are due June 30th. I just think we should all be aware of that, depending on how that economic landscape looks. And also there was an article in the myrecordjournal.com about Southington's library. I know that when we first started down this journey, we were being compared to that library project, and the article titles "Officials Defend and Question Look of New Southington Library Design," with the main issues being that 17 million referendum. And so they're currently debating about going out to go for more money or not, seeing that the library building is not going to be big enough. And they will not be able to add to it when all is said and done due to the financial constraints. So I'll be sending that to the entire LBC after this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Other committee members? All right, everyone, thank you. So let's, we have members of the public here. Anybody with their hand up, Nancy?
Anybody? Oh, yes, we have Sten Casperson. Go ahead, Stan.
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. If you can hear me, my internet is stable. The minutes say there's an updated building committee charge. I'm very familiar with the last charge. As a taxpayer, I would appreciate knowing where to see the most current charge, or maybe somebody from the committee could just send it over to me. Thank you.
It's on the website, on the webpage,
Which one?
the library building committee webpage on the town website.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other hands?
No.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, you know what? I had the corner of my screen blocked, so I thank Deputy Mayor Davis for attending. And with that, if there's no further comments, then
So moved.
we'll move for adjournment.
So
Moved by
moved.
Second.
Bob, seconded by Liz. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
evening,
Good to
everyone.
see you
Have a
soon.
good night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everybody. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.